On a quiet September night in 1851, a group of armed men surrounded a modest house in Christiana, Pennsylvania, believing they were about to capture 4 escaped slaves and claim a handsome reward. Instead, what followed would explode into one of the most shocking and defiant moments in American history. An event so bold that it forced the United States government to put dozens of ordinary citizens on trial for treason. In the early 1850s, the United States was a nation simmering with tension. The passage of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 had given slaveholders sweeping powers to hunt down escaped slaves, even in free states. It forced citizens and officials in the North to assist in capturing runaway slaves, and those who refused faced severe penalties. For many Americans in the North, this law felt like an assault on their moral beliefs and personal freedom. In Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, a small rural community became a refuge for freedom seekers, formerly enslaved people who had escaped bondage in the South. Many settled near the village of Christiana, where they worked as farmers, laborers, and craftsmen. They built quiet lives, always aware that slave catchers could arrive at any moment. One of those who had escaped slavery was a man named William Parker. Parker was intelligent, determined, and fearless. After escaping from Maryland, he settled in Christiana and became an informal leader among the black residents. He organized a self-defense network that warned neighbors whenever suspicious strangers were seen in the area. They agreed that if slave catchers came, they would resist rather than surrender. Their fears became reality in September 1851. Edward Gorsuch, a wealthy Maryland slaveholder, had been searching for 4 men who had escaped from his plantation years earlier. Determined to reclaim what he considered his property, Gorsuch secured federal warrants and assembled a posse that included U.S. marshals and local officials. Before dawn on September 11th, the group arrived at Parker's farmhouse. They believed the fugitives were hiding inside. The marshals knocked on the door and demanded entry, presenting legal documents that allowed them to seize the men. Inside the farmhouse, tension filled the air. Parker and the others refused to surrender. Instead, Parker sent a signal, a horn blast that echoed across the countryside. It was a prearranged call for help. Within minutes, neighbors began arriving, both black and white. Among them were members of the local Quaker community who were strongly opposed to slavery. Some carried farm tools, others carried firearms. The crowd quickly grew, surrounding the slave catchers. What happened next stunned the nation. A confrontation broke out and shots were fired. In the chaos, Edward Gorsuch was fatally wounded. His son was injured, and the posse was forced to retreat. The escaped men fled the area with assistance from abolitionists and supporters of the Underground Railroad. Many eventually made their way to Canada, beyond the reach of American slave laws. News of the clash spread rapidly across the country. Southern leaders were outraged. To them, the resistance in Christiana was nothing less than rebellion against federal authority. The U.S. government responded with overwhelming force. Federal authorities arrested dozens of people connected to the incident: black residents, white farmers, and even prominent abolitionists. Among those arrested was Castner Hanway, a white miller accused of leading the resistance. The government charged Hanway with treason against the United States, an accusation rarely used and extremely serious. If convicted, he could have been executed. The trial that followed became one of the most dramatic legal battles of the era. Prosecutors argued that resisting federal officers amounted to war against the government. Defense attorneys, however, claimed that Hanway had not led any rebellion and that citizens had the right to protect themselves and their neighbors. After intense courtroom arguments and national media attention, the jury delivered the verdict: not guilty. The decision shocked many Americans.
If this resistance didn't count as treason, critics wondered, what did? The government soon dropped charges against the remaining defendants, unable to secure convictions. The Christiana Resistance, as it became known, had far-reaching consequences. It exposed the deep divisions between North and South and demonstrated how fiercely many Northerners opposed the enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act. It also revealed that ordinary citizens, farmers, laborers, and craftsmen were willing to risk their lives and freedom to stand against slavery. Historians now see the Christiana Resistance as a critical moment in the growing conflict that would eventually erupt into the American Civil War less than a decade later. It was not fought on a battlefield, but in a quiet rural community where ordinary people made extraordinary choices. What makes this story so astonishing is not just the violence or the courtroom drama, but the courage of individuals who stood against a powerful system. In a time when the law demanded obedience, they chose resistance, an act that reshaped the national conversation about freedom, justice, and the limits of government power. Even today, the echoes of that September morning remind us that history is often shaped not only by presidents and generals, but by ordinary people who refuse to back down when faced with injustice.